You want to understand humanity? Then sit down, breathe, clear your mind of preconceptions, because what I'm about to tell you will make the foundations of your beliefs tremble. My name is Admiral Talon. I've spent more than a century cataloging and interpreting the nature of human warfare, diplomacy, and strategic behavior. I've watched, listened, documented, and still, what I've seen defies reason. So today, I stand here, not just to inform you, but to prepare you. Because if you don't grasp the gravity of who know what humans truly are, you won't survive the next encounter. Behind me, you'll see the first slide. A cluster of rotating images on the projection wall, photographs, maps, tactical overlays. One in particular, freeze-framed, the Battle of Yavon 5. Humans called it a light bombardment. That's the term they used in their mission report. Light. I want you to burn that word into your mind, because what you're seeing is anything but light. In that image, 5 human battle cruisers in stationary orbit above the rebel outpost known as the Keep. Simultaneously, they're unleashing orbital artillery platforms, thick, hammering pulses of plasma, railfire, and chemical ordnance. Over 2 megatons of explosive force blanketed a region less than 50 square miles. That's enough destructive power to flatten mountain ranges, boil lakes, and carve craters visible from orbit for decades. And yet, when human delegates were questioned by the Galactic War Ethics Committee about the disproportionality of their response, their reaction wasn't indignation, nor was it remorse. It was confusion, genuine confusion. They looked at us, those of us seated on the panel, and said, "That's just standard orbital fire support, no remorse, no shame, no exaggerated defense, just flat, tactical logic." Let me put that into perspective. What they deployed over Yavon 5 could have erased half the surface of a smaller moon, but to them, that was routine, logistical, expected. And the most terrifying part is they weren't being sarcastic. To drive home just how absurdly casual humanity views violence, allow me to show you another still. On the next frame, a screenshot from a human media outlet. The Yavon 5 bombardment didn't make front page news. It didn't even make the first paragraph. It was tucked beneath a subheader beneath another subheader titled Human Volunteers Aid in Peacekeeping. I'm not exaggerating. In their own words, their contribution to galactic stabilization was barely worth a footnote, but to us, that footnote was a planetary war crime. Now, before you let your blood pressure rise too far, let's go deeper. Let's journey to New Colandi, a city built on centuries of science and culture, turned into scorched soil and radioactive silence. Here's the frame. You'll recognize this one of the most infamous war images in the annals of the Galactic Archive. A human soldier, female, leaning casually against the charred remains of a tree, rifle slung over her back. Expression unreadable. She is not tense, not guarded. She is calm, almost peaceful. Behind her, smoke, buildings shattered like dried bone, autocannon fire still echoing as remote gunships scour what remains of resistance. And in this environment where ash falls like snow, this human soldier rests as if she's on a Sunday stroll. That photo wasn't propaganda. It wasn't a dramatization. It was real. And the implications are staggering. According to both human, military records and independent third-party observers, this lone trooper eliminated 57 enemy combatants solo before extraction. That number was confirmed, not exaggerated. 57. But that's not the part that makes seasoned strategists lose sleep. What happened next was, shortly after her extraction, New Colandi ceased to exist, not figuratively, not politically, physically, gone. Human command authorized the release of high-yield thermonuclear payloads, a saturation strike. The entire city, and everything within a 200-mile radius was reduced to glass, a literal sea of fused, irradiated crystal. Nothing survived. No one survived. And here's the sickeningly strategic part. They called it a containment measure. The image transitions. We now see the interior of a courtroom, the tribunal floor, Galactic Council vs. Humanity, war crimes charges. You might expect a flurry of justifications, a parade of apologies, an appeal to the ethics board. But the human legal team needed only 2 arguments. 1. The Galactic Council had formally requested humanity's intervention against the Colandi uprising. 2. The enemy had initiated biowarfare protocols releasing lethal strains of engineered viruses from the Colandi Research Institute in a desperate bid to deter human troops. The human attorney didn't yell. He didn't posture. He simply stared down the court and said, "We had a choice. Lose a city, or lose a planet." And just like that, the case was dismissed. I took a long breath before I resumed. The gallery was silent, dead silent. They had to be, because what I was about to say next would reframe everything they knew about limits, proportionality, and sanity. Let me make this clear. Humanity glassed New Colonti not as a punishment but as a favor. Yes, a concession. What the Council didn't know was that human military high command had initially proposed something far worse. Their original draft plan included the sterilization of the entire continent, not just the city, not just the surrounding region, the whole continent, rendered uninhabitable for 1,000 years. Worse still, they wanted to quarantine a zone spanning 15 light years in all directions. Not just a planet, not even a solar system, but a sphere of space containing dozens of inhabited worlds. Why? To make absolutely sure that whatever the Coloni scientists had cooked up in their last act of defiance wouldn't spread. That's what they called precautionary, and you'll be disturbed to know, even that wasn't considered extreme. By their standards. At this point, one of the younger officers in the Tribunal, barely out of her first decade of service, raised a trembling hand. Her voice, when it came, was thin and unsteady. If a 15-light-year quarantine wasn't overkill, then what is? I chuckled, not out of mockery, but out of exhaustion, out of disbelief that I had to say what I was about to say next. If only we knew. The reaction was instantaneous. The entire chamber rippled with whispers, gasps, and shuffling boots. The phrase echoed through the room like a war chant turned backwards. We didn't know. That's the problem, because the moment you think you've identified the ceiling of human capacity, they shatter it, casually, as if it never existed. As I advanced the slide, the next revelation took form. There had been proposals, real proposals circulated in top-tier human defense networks, suggesting that in some cases, a 100-light-year quarantine might be necessary. That's not a misprint. 100. You could hear a pin drop. The silence after that last statement lingered like smoke. Even the ventilation systems in the chamber seemed to hesitate, as if the very air itself didn't want to move. A 100-light-year quarantine? That wasn't warfare. That wasn't diplomacy. That was celestial realignment. Rewriting the map of known space like it was a spreadsheet entry. But to the humans, it was a reasonable contingency. I let the silence hang for a moment longer, until even the most defiant eyes dropped in discomfort. Then I advanced the feed. The screen behind me began to shift, flickering rapidly through hundreds of images, infrastructure blueprints, military insignias, trade agreements, and backroom deals caught by high-resolution diplomatic surveillance. And then photos of weapons platforms, terraforming rigs, shipyards that defied conventional geometry, galaxies with names we hadn't cataloged. Human space wasn't confined to star systems, it stretched across dimensions of governance, psychology, and control we hadn't begun to comprehend. This next sequence, I said, is classified to the highest echelon. Viewing this outside this chamber is a direct violation of interstellar security law. Leaking it will result in not just dismissal, not just prison, but likely execution. Understand, this isn't a show. This is a revelation. The room darkened completely. Even the data screens dulled, bathing the Tribunal in cold shadow. Then a video began. The footage had been obtained by embedded observers stationed near what was previously designated an inactive human transport route. The area was quiet until suddenly it wasn't. On the display, a hypergate, larger than anything we had ever documented. Not just large, monolithic, constructed from materials that shimmered with impossible quantum oscillation, humming in frequencies that made our own audio sensors register nausea, and surrounding it ships, thousands of them. One of my attending officers leaned forward, eyes wide, voice caught in his throat. Are we seeing this live? No, I answered. This was archived from a scout drone that didn't make it home. The camera zoomed in, showing layer after layer of warships, not transport frigates, not patrol vessels. We were looking at dreadnoughts, planetary assault carriers, super capital war engines with weapon arrays larger than cities. In total, 11,127 distinct human military vessels. And those were just the ones we could verify, the officers beside me murmured. One finally spoke up. That's not a battle group. That's a mobile civilization. The hypergate flared, its corona of gravitational light twisted like a snake of stars being strangled. The nearby star previously stable dimmed. In response, as if the gate was siphoning its energy directly from the star's core, another voice, that can't be right. Hypergates don't do that. Nothing does that. The camera kept zooming. At its center, something shimmered, not static, a distortion, a visual rupture, like the fabric of the universe was being ripped open. And behind that, something else, a reflection, a peek into another galaxy, a different spiral arm, one we hadn't mapped, not even charted. I turned to the chamber and spoke, slow and firm. Our analysis confirms it. That gate doesn't link to any known galactic cluster. It's not in the Great Band. It's not in the archive. It's not in any of the trillion mapped stellar arrays. It connects to somewhere else, somewhere older. An emergency beacon flared in the corner of the screen. A panicked call for immediate escalation. The screen flickered. The last audible voice from the recording, an officer, stunned into a whisper, said, "Get Overlord command. Everything's changed." The screen went black. There was no applause, no rebuttal, no smug delegation ready to call the footage fake. Just breathing. Quiet, slow, fearful breathing. I cleared my throat and continued. "Ladies and gentlemen of this tribunal, let me be abundantly clear. Humanity is not just alien in behavior. They are alien in origin." Eyes snapped up. No one had dared say it outright before. The theory had floated around for centuries, always dismissed as crackpot, fiction, or paranoia. But now we had proof. They are not from our galaxy. They are not of this place. They are intergalactic. More slides rotated on the wall. Photographs, now dozens of galaxies highlighted, some familiar, some completely uncharted. Our intelligence had finally cracked fragments of human internal communications, mostly through insane levels of decryption, espionage, and a bit of divine luck. What we discovered was horrifying. They exert direct control over no fewer than 27 entire galaxies, but that's just the core. They are present, in some capacity, military, economic, or cultural, in at least 1,720 galaxies. Some extrapolated models based on jump gate triangulations, cross-reference trade flow, and migration patterns estimate they may have touched over 10,000 galaxies in some form. Let that number settle. 10,000. There were audible gasps. One officer clutched her temple. Another was fanning himself with a datapad, sweat dripping from his temple despite the regulated temperature. Their understanding of galactic power had just been shattered like thin glass under artillery fire. "They are a Type 3 civilization," I said. "On the Kardashev scale." Whispers rose. "No, beyond Type 3. I corrected myself. "They are post-empire, post-limitation, 100-fold civilization. 1,000,000 stars? That's a unit of currency. To them, 100 light-year quarantine? That's not an act of desperation. It's logistics." And then, without warning, the next slide cut in. The room flinched. It was a map, detailed, labeled, and terrifying. It was the Alther sector, and something called the Great Rift. 10 years ago, the rift opened. We hadn't even fully comprehended what it was before it swallowed the entire Alther star cluster. Just gone, vanished into gravitational smoke. Radiation levels surged to extinction-level thresholds. It wasn't a breach. It wasn't a war. It was a celestial devouring, and it took 157 species, humans included, to halt its spread. 15,000 stars were nearly extinguished in weeks. Every empire in that quadrant scrambled their entire fleets just to contain the flare's edge. I gave the Tribunal a full minute to breathe. They didn't. They stared, silent, until the next image struck the final nail. The final transmission from Alther, the last image received, a human hypergate, and a beam of annihilation erupting from its maw, human-made, human-deployed. The crowd lost its mind. Officers screamed. Ambassadors shouted. Translations broke down into static. Panic radiated like fire from the days. It took everything in my lungs to yell above the chorus. "Order, order now." Nothing worked until the screen shifted once more, and then came the silence of the damned. A being, humanoid, or it used to be, its flesh twisted into knots of exposed muscle and bone, face disfigured, screaming in a way that bypassed sound and stabbed the soul. It wasn't war. It was infection, pain, uncontainable. And that's when I told them what it was. Inside Alther, there had been a plague, a disease so virulent, so destructive, that one single infected individual could doom a planet in less than 48 hours. We had tried everything: quarantines, planetary isolation, burn protocols. Nothing stopped it. And the humans? They didn't hesitate. They studied it, cross-referenced it, then they feared it. And when humanity fears something, they destroy it. Completely. No trace, no survivors, no mercy. What you saw, the hypergate beam, was a directed energy cannon powered by a quasar, a supermassive black hole, with constructs channeling its radiation into a surgical lance of obliteration. It is the single most powerful weapon ever devised. They call it the Quasar Lance. They've used it in at least 5 known incidents. This was not madness. This was protocol. The chamber, once filled with political swagger and bureaucratic pride, had descended into something far darker, a kind of sacred, paralyzing awe. You could hear the heartbeats of commanders. You could taste the fear in the back of your throat. That thing, the weapon, the Quasar Lance, wasn't a bluff. It wasn't a deterrent. It was their solution, their firewall, their reset button. And the reason they used it was even worse than the beam itself, because the plague we called the Alther strain was not unknown to them. No, they'd encountered it before. In other galaxies, in other wars, in other collapses of civilization, they had seen this monster before, and they'd learned the hard way that you do not contain the scourge. You erase it, utterly. We call it the scourge because no other word fits. It infects biology, technology, even thought itself. A mimetic virus, a molecular predator, a parasite of quantum information. It doesn't just kill, it assimilates, transforms, uses you. The humans had a name for it too, but they don't speak it out loud anymore. They say the sound of it gives their admirals nightmares, and if you've ever seen a human admiral in battle, you'd know just how horrifying that must be. They feared it so much that they glassed 273 planets in a 10-day span before opening the Alther Rift as a last resort. No ceremony, no diplomacy, no public debate, just annihilation, delivered at light speed. Some of those planets had not yet shown symptoms. That didn't matter. They didn't gamble. They didn't hesitate. They made a choice no one else could make. When the Council demanded an explanation, begged for negotiations, threatened sanctions, they responded with the quasar beam, and in their own words, it was already too late for diplomacy. You just didn't know it yet. The Tribunal remained frozen, eyes wide. No one moved. No one even coughed. It was as though sound itself had retreated. And then, I spoke the final truth. Everything you've seen today, every battle, every orbiting fleet, every explosion and firestorm is just the edge of their power, a whisper of the monster asleep beneath their skin. Humanity doesn't just build weapons, they build systems, systems that outlive their own empires. They build hypercults of strategy, fleets of ghost eyes, treaties written in subatomic ink, time-frozen arsenals buried under dying stars. They are not merely warriors. They are curators of destruction, librarians of apocalypse. You think you understand scale? To them, a war that costs 5 billion lives is manageable. To them, overkill isn't a mistake, it's doctrine. I scanned the faces in the chamber. Some were crying, some were vacant. One had collapsed and been dragged from the room. The rest, pale, eyes flicking between the screen and me, as if hoping I was part of a nightmare they could wake from. And still, I wasn't finished. One last slide. One last image to bury the old galaxy. It was a simple satellite photo. No violence, no ships, just a lone human diplomat standing at the edge of a refugee camp on a scorched world. Children clung to her. Her eyes were tired, but kind. Her arms wrapped around 2 alien infants whose species had been extinct everywhere else. Beneath the photo, a plaque. To save a people, we burned their world. And they thanked us. I turned back to the Tribunal. You must understand something vital, I said. Humans are not malevolent. They are not conquerors. They have no desire to rule us. In truth, they are the most cooperative, peace-seeking, altruistic species we have ever known. They establish embassies. They uphold treaties. They feed starving planets. They restore wounded ecologies. They heal. But if pushed, if cornered, if threatened, they will unleash horrors that make black holes look merciful. I paused. My next words weren't in my script. I spoke from the soul. We don't stand beside humanity. We orbit them, like dust around a sun. And if that sun ever flares, we burn. Somewhere in the audience, someone whispered, "Then what do we do?" I turned toward them, and I told the truth. You do nothing. You don't challenge them. You don't question their doctrine. You don't investigate their vaults or sneak ships into their inner systems. You don't mock them, trick them, or second-guess their instincts. When they say a species needs to be contained, you step aside. When they say a weapon needs to be buried in a star, you salute. When they say a galaxy must be closed, you lock the door and swallow the key. Because humans don't ask for permission when the survival of the universe is at stake, and when they act, I let the words hang, then finally said them. They act like gods. Another pause. I gave the Tribunal my final breath. Don't bring a cruiser to a Quasar fight. Don't ever piss the humans off.